Welcome to Face-to-Face Health, everyone. Thanks for joining us tonight for a very special discussion about grief and children and how best to cope with those emotions that come from grief. I am Dr. Zarmi Shanawaz. I'm the medical director here at Face-to-Face Health. Thanks again for joining. Before we delve into the realm of grief and children, I would like to go ahead and introduce our CEO and founder, Dr. Amina, who, for those of you who are not familiar with the platform, would like to introduce you to what we actually offer and what we do at Face-to-Face Health.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. My name is Amina. I'm an internal medicine and integrative medicine physician, but most importantly, I'm a mother who struggled with her twins for about 7 years. We had a bunch of physical delays that we were overcoming with a bunch of therapists, and we couldn't really coordinate access or information or support in an optimal manner. So as a result of that journey and speaking to over 2,000 parents and providers, we gave birth to Face-to-Face Health, which is a one-stop shop digital platform that offers virtual care on demand, advice as Ask an Expert or concierge care once COVID lifts, and phenomenal educational resources that have tools such as apps, toys, books, and games that we have been vetted by hundreds of experts from over 90 specialties. It's interactive and it's on the top conditions that parents are looking at for their children from 0 to 18. And my favorite feature is the support communities. So enjoy our webinar tonight and please learn more at www.f2fhealth.com. And thank you so much for joining us. And I'm so happy to have Amina Tafra with us. She's very talented. And Zarmi, our medical director, thank you so much for coordinating.
Yeah, thanks, Ami. Good to see you tonight. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Amina Tafra, who will be in conversation with us tonight. Amina is a dance movement therapist, performing arts and fitness instructor. So she's multi-talented. She's also a certified aromatherapist and essential oils expert. Amina received her Master's of Science in Creative Arts Therapy from the Pratt Institute and her aromatherapy certifications through the Aroma Head Institute. Amina provides adult and child-focused individual and group therapy sessions for those suffering from PTSD, schizophrenia, substance abuse, and personality disorders, and she has extensive experience in these areas. So welcome, Amina. Thanks for joining us tonight.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you. And again, thank you, Ami and Zama, for inviting me to share my experience. I hope that everyone gets, some education, and I really hope that what we share today will really help your children as well.
Absolutely. So before we actually get into, I do want to cover just very briefly what we're going to discuss tonight. But Amina, can you tell us a little bit about what a creative arts therapist does, what that actually entails, because I think it's an amazing area, but under researched, or at least poorly understood.
Sure. I always give people the layman term, the definition of creative arts therapy. I say that take psychology and an art modality, whether it's visual arts, music, drama, or dance, and they married and had a baby. So that's pretty much what creative arts therapy is in a nutshell. So instead of going to see a psychologist and talking through your problems and expressing your emotions, again, through talk therapy, you're able to do that through an art modality, right? So an art therapist would use paint or markers or pencil or clay to help you process. A drama therapist obviously would do acting. Music therapists, singing. Maybe there's a certain instrument or rhythm to help you process. And obviously what I do is dance. So I incorporate maybe a specific dance style, especially if my clients love to dance. I incorporate the choreography, music as well, and different rhythms. And of course, the different ranges and movements of the body. Some people say, well, if I can't dance, do I see a dance therapist? And I say yes. So anything that is body-based psychotherapy, it can also be breath work, stillness, and meditation. And some dance movement therapists do incorporate the practice of yoga as well.
Right. And you're also an aromatherapist. So do you incorporate aromatherapy into your dance movement practice?
Yes, I do. I truly believe that Mother Earth is healing. And so the use of essential oils, whether that's to help any physical ailment that you may have, or just to help with emotional balance, different essential oils I do use, whether diffused in a diffuser, or I will make an actual aromatherapy product. So that can be like a lotion or ointment, or even an inhaler as well.
Right. Okay. And, I'm going to say that everyone can dance, even if it's with two left feet. So I don't believe that that nobody can dance. So with that being said and understood, just tonight, what we really want to do is, we thought that grief and talking to children about grief is just so topical right now with COVID going on. There has been loss in many different forms. And so what we want to do for all of you in the audience really is to kind of talk about how a creative arts therapist might help us in that process, what grief looks like in children, what negative coping mechanisms are in children, and then how to actually help our kids, deal with grief as well, both individually and in a family context as well. So very excited to get into that discussion. So let me go ahead and start off with our first statement here, which, Amina, you can enlighten us on this one. Grief is only associated with the death of a loved one, person, or pet.
Yes.
Fact or fiction?
Oh, sorry. Sorry, something. So yes, guys, this is fiction. Most people do associate grief with obviously passing of a family member or loved one and our furry friends or pets. But grief is actually the loss of any structure or anything that is a routine in our lives. Okay. So for example, if a child is dealing with their parents getting a divorce, they can go through the grief process because it's the loss of that family structure and that family dynamic. If you moved, maybe you moved from one state or another, the child can also go through grief because they lose their friends and maybe their school that they went to. So it's really any loss of not just a person or a furry friend, but just a structure or a routine that a child had in their everyday life and in their environment.
Right. And so we go on to the next sort of word, I guess, which is trauma. You deal a lot with trauma in individuals and group settings as well. Can you talk to us a little bit about trauma?
Yes, trauma is usually just a very abrupt event that happens in anyone's life, but especially for children, it's really hard for them to process that trauma. It can feel very devastating, and they have a sense of lack of control. And how do I handle this trauma? So it can be something drastic like molestation, as we see on the slide with rape. It could be a car accident that they're in, a natural disaster. Some of my clients, when I used to work in California, they were victims of the forest fires happening in California. So again, any abrupt event that's just devastating. And one of them, as we know, unfortunately, is COVID-19. That is definitely a traumatic event for us all. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so let's bring this into context. COVID-19 seen as trauma. What are the variables that are involved in that?
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I just want to bring to mind is really simple. We don't really think about it, but just our breath, just being able to fully inhale and exhale and use our breath has been a huge trauma just to the body in itself. So even if you don't have COVID-19, just the idea of wearing the mask and how, we just can't take a breath. Again, it seems simple, but it is traumatic to the body. Social gatherings, initially everyone was quarantined. People had to stay home, right? Only leave the house if it was necessary. So the lack of just interacting with our neighborhood and within our communities, Obviously, school, we all know the changes that the DOE has imposed on us and our kids, working remotely, again, not interacting with teachers and their peers like they should. And another thing also is the mental and emotional stability. Again, children, they are aware, but they can't really figure out or put into words the feelings that they're going through. And so the grief is just the loss of being balanced in their emotions, right? And so they may start having this intense sadness, or maybe this anxiety that's lasting for a very long time, right? And so the loss of understanding the emotions, and now it's this one main emotion that they're feeling and experiencing. And again, that can be very traumatic to their bodies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, as an adult, we can make these direct correlations between what's going on around us and how we're feeling. But that idea of uncertainty or not fully understanding where my feelings are coming from would be intensely traumatic, I would think.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. And just going back to this idea of breathing, which, I had not actually thought of before. It really is so simple. But, I find myself, if I'm in the park, I will take my mask off for a millisecond and just take in a deep breath of just fresh city air, as fresh as it can be. And it just feels so good.
Mhm.
So, question for you, in your line of work, have you seen an increase in the kids that you're seeing? Have you been seeing more children perhaps referred to you or with more sort of, I guess, anxiety-like symptoms during the time of COVID?
Yes, unfortunately, I have. In terms of anxiety, a lot of it is the inability to sleep. I'm getting a lot of children where their sleep pattern is just completely disrupted. Um, I honestly do feel it's just mentally and just their eyes being on a screen all day. We really shouldn't be looking at a computer screen every day, for 4 or 5 hours a day. That has disrupted just their sleeping pattern. And so I do get a lot of kids who, are referred to me and they go, I only get 3 hours of sleep, or I wake up in the middle of the night at like 2 in the morning. And so that has been, unfortunately, really stressful for them. And again, like you mentioned, Zarmaine, not knowing or not having a set time and date where this thing will be over, this whole COVID rules and regulations and this routine will be over. And so they are coming up with this anxiety. They need that children would like to have an answer of when this will end, and we don't have them for them yet. And so that anxiety and that uncertainty is another reason why children are being referred to me.
Yeah. So when we had spoken, before the talk, an interesting thing that you pointed out to me was that, children and young adults grieve quite differently to adults. It's not sort of an intensity type thing. It's just a completely different processing. So could we talk about that? How do we actually understand what grieving is like in these age groups?
Yeah, sure. One of the main things is that as children, your parents pretty much do everything for you. Your responsibilities really is just go to school, clean up your room and eat your vegetables, right? And so as they are going through this trauma and this grieving process, because they don't have too many things to do, there's not much on their plate, they don't get that much anxiety, or it's not that intense as for adults, right? Because we have to take care of the kids, we have to still pay the bills, we have to figure out a new schedule, right? So there's just more responsibilities that parents have to deal with that's less than what children have to do, right? Another thing that I wanted to mention, which is number B on this slide, is especially dealing with the grieving of a loved one, more so a person, so a family member, a best friend. I get a lot that children actually see the spirit of the person that's passed. And so I do just want to take a moment as adults to just throw away your spiritual beliefs, or religion or lack thereof, right? Just put that aside for a moment. And this is very common, for our children to, say, yeah, I saw mom or dad or grandma and grandpa either during waking hours or in a dream as well.
Yeah, and I think we're probably going to touch on this a little bit later when we go through the different kind of groups, but children looking for their loved one or their lost one. Yeah, and then just rewinding a little bit, when we had talked more about that sense of responsibility, obviously that relates to the worldview of the child. So sort of what you're saying is that because their arena of control, I guess the things that they can control are less than what it is in adults, it does probably feel a little bit more overwhelming for them because they're not quite sure where to place this.
Yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Yeah. And then, what you were saying, Zarmay, is children, they want to take control of what they're feeling in the moment, or they want to change the situation, but they can't because they are a child, right?
Yeah.
So again, like you said, that lack of control can, be very, very problematic for them.
Yeah. And what do you mean by isolation?
Yes. So again, just wanting to remove themselves from the situation, again, depending on their age, if the adults are handling everything and they can't fully process it, especially for young kids, they just tend to regress and be withdrawn and want to take to themselves a little bit more. If I do see an adolescent, it's a very personal thing for them, right? So same thing with isolation, just want to feel like they want to handle it by themselves, just be more introverted in this process and versus sharing and letting it out, especially sharing it with another adult.
Yeah. And they probably often don't have the words to express those feelings as well, which probably leads to further isolation and withdrawal.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Age and time frames affect grieving process.
So again, this just goes back to a child versus an adult. So with adults, if you lose something that you spent a lot of time on, so for example, if your mom passed away, and you're 40 years old, you had 40 years of your life of all these memories, right, that you remember of spending with your mom. So it's just going to take time for you to go through that process. Whereas if your child is 5 and your mom, AKA grandma, passes away, it's only 5 years, right? And even during those infant years, those young years, your child probably doesn't even remember. So usually the grieving process for the child is actually much shorter than it is for the adult. Same thing, for example, if you lived in a community, and then you moved to get another job, so to speak. If the child's only 5 and lived in that community, again, for 5 years, then they don't have as many memories, right, to go back to or to refer to. So their process tends to be a lot shorter than adults.
Right. And I guess, and that's what relates to bonding as well. We're going to touch on this more later on, I know, but one of the things that we wanted to discuss briefly here was also the behavioral changes that we see in kids when they're grieving.
Yeah. So we did touch on isolation, but also anger can come up as well, especially if they are younger kids and they can't put their emotions into words. They just get very frustrated and angry and not understanding what's going on and what's happening. So anger really comes out. And again, back to not being in control. I get this a lot with my teenagers. They feel like they're ready to rule the world, and sorry, you're only 16, not yet, right? And so even though they're capable of understanding what's happening, maybe even physically capable of making change, because they are still a child and they're bound to the decisions of their parent, that anger and that frustration is definitely the first thing that they go through.
So acknowledging that, grieving is normal and natural and healthy. Let's move on to how do we actually know if our child is not dealing well with grief? Is there a time frame? Are there certain behaviors that we should be looking out for? Again, as with everything else, this probably falls into age blocks as well in terms of their reactions and their behaviors. So if we could just kind of go through those age blocks and kind of what you see commonly in your practice.
Yes. First thing I do want to mention, side note, just a little bit, but in psychology, we do use, mental health practitioners do use the DSM, Diagnostic Statistic Manual. We're in version 5 right now. And so just FYI, if your child experiences any unhealthy behavior for minimum 6 months to more, that's when, there is a red flag, there's an alert to definitely seek help for your child. So again, minimum 6 months or more, most likely your child is either going through a very unhealthy symptom or may gear into being diagnosed with something like depression or anxiety. So did want to put that out there for sure.
Yeah. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And actually, before we get into this, I should have mentioned right at the beginning, if any of you have any questions for Amina, please send them through in either the chat or the Q&A box, and we will definitely get to those. Sorry, Amina, continue.
No, you're fine, Zame. You're good. Thank you. Yes. So how do you know if your child is not dealing well? If the loss just happens, obviously the first day, maybe even the first week, maybe even the month, okay? The behavior and the pattern of isolation, maybe experiencing anger, the withdrawal, not wanting to connect, is very normal, okay? So I would say after a month, if you don't see your child going back to being their normal self, connecting with you, interacting with their friends, after a month, you definitely check in and start to seek professional help. But yes, definitely also physical symptoms can arise as well. So like the slide says, there are some headaches, panic attacks can occur, especially with feelings of anxiety. And we normally hold our stress if it's not in our shoulders and our neck, but definitely in our gut and in our stomach. So that's very common for children to feel that stress and those nervous and uncomfortable feelings in their stomach area. So just notice that as well. And then the change of appetite is another symptom. So of course, if you're sad or not feeling well, maybe you don't want to eat. But again, after a month, if you see your child skipping meals or any issues with stomach pain, that's definitely a high concern. Yeah. And then last on this slide, usually happens more with adolescents. So teenage years, about 12 to 18, is self-harm behavior. A lot of things can be harmful, but the specific term of self-harm does have to deal with physically hurting or causing trauma to the body. So for example, that can be pulling out the hair, the child can pull up their hair. It can be if they smoke while you're not looking, while you're not watching. Sometimes they'll take a cigarette and like burn their skin, or they'll take a lighter or a candle and try to burn their skin. Even eraser, actually. I've seen children take an eraser like during school and try to give themselves a burn. So any self-harm common practice that your child sees, inflicting on themselves, again, is a concern and should be addressed.
Yeah, and we will, moving forward, I think we're going to focus more on that tween and teen kind of age group. But what we see, I guess, in the younger age group, the babies, the toddlers coming up towards preschool and young school age, is a big one is the regression, where perhaps a child who is toilet trained will start bedwetting again. They will start perhaps not wanting to go to school. And then as they get older, there becomes more of the social kind of withdrawal and the expression in these kinds of negative ways. A few of the things that I also sort of came across while we were kind of putting this talk together as well was particularly with tweens and teens, they start to become hyper anxious about the safety of their family members, of the environment around them. And then, as you already mentioned, you know, big problems with sleep, appetite. This is when all the really somatic stuff starts to come out. And these are kind of the red flags that parents should definitely be on the lookout for if, you know, if they're persistent. One of the things I wonder if you find is tweens and teens kind of this sense of embarrassment about talking or even expressing grief, or kind of showing that everything is not as it should be. Do you see a lot of that in this age group?
I don't see it because of their age. I may see it because of the cultural background that they're being raised with. You know, the common stereotype is that, you know, children that identify as female are allowed to be emotional and cry and express that. And then children who identify as male, they're strong and there's not a problem and they're the ones holding the family together. So I wouldn't say necessarily not wanting to share or embarrassment based on the age, but I do see it based on sex/gender.
Right, interesting. And then one other thing I was curious about is, in your line of work, do you recommend that parents should maybe tell the teachers or someone at school that there has been a loss in the family, so that they can also look out for, I don't know, slipping grades or poor concentration, that sort of thing? Is that something, or is that kind of going against confidentiality? How do you handle that?
Yeah, so I currently work in 2 schools, actually. In terms of privacy and confidentiality, it really depends on the parent. Like, you have the say of what you want to disclose to your school staff or not. I highly recommend you do not have to share details, right? But you should say something like, there has been a family emergency, or, you know, our family has gone through something that I know will affect my child's behavior, you know, FYI, because at the end of the day, you know, your children are in school for quite a period of time,
Yeah.
right? And then also, you don't want your teachers to, you know, fail your child, or, you know, to reprimand them or to discipline them, right, unfairly, without fully understanding that they're actually going through something. So I highly recommend to please communicate with your teachers, even the principal. Again, you don't have to share details, just so that teacher can also be a support system as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And this kind of brings me back to the self-harm again. In this age group, we see a lot of the problems with self-image, self-esteem, around grief as well, sort of intensifying. So let's move on to this statement here. Self-harm or self-injury is a mental illness or diagnosis. This relates to the last point that we were talking about.
Yeah. So again, if you do see your child exhibit any self-harm or self-injurious behavior, do not go straight into, oh, my child is depressed. Especially if you see cutting. Cutting is very scary to see in a child. The most common places would be the forearm area close to the wrist. And so you don't have to even jump to, oh, you know, my child tried to commit suicide. Thank you, Zami, for the next slide, right?
I hope I didn't de-emphasize too much.
Yeah, we gradually led into that. Thank you. So yes, again, back to the DSM-5. Anything exhibited for 6 months or more goes straight into a diagnosis and a mental illness. But most of the time, self-harm is just a way for your child to feel. A lot of times, the way that they're dealing with trauma and grief and a sense of loss is that they're not feeling, right? A lot of times, they're just numb to what's going on. And it's usually just a way for the child to feel safe in their environment, or the way for the mind to just shut down. So if something is too traumatic to go through and to process, a lot of times the mind will just shut down. Emotions shut down, and the child just feels numb. And the quickest and fastest way to feel again is to, again, do that self-harm behavior. Actually, bruising or slightly cutting the skin releases and allows them to feel again. So again, it's unhealthy, but don't jump into, oh, they're going to commit suicide, or they're depressed. Again, it does take a mental health professional to work with your child to really see what's going on.
Right. And I know you had mentioned to me that you see a lot of this kind of behavior in PTSD, right, with brain fog and numbing. Okay, so taking all of this into account, there are obviously a whole host of negative coping mechanisms, and there are some mechanisms that we see quite commonly due to age, due to culture, etc. As parents and caregivers, how do we actually help our kids grieve in a healthy way?
First thing I always tell parents is, doesn't matter your child's age, just be honest. Like, I know we want to make sure that our children are safe, and sometimes we want to shield them from the troubles of the world. But honestly, just being direct and let them know what's going on is the best way. Because children, especially young children, they may not formulate the words yet or have formulating, language yet, but they sense, right? They definitely are very sensitive to the energy of other people and the energy in the environment. So even if they don't fully understand it, they sense that something's wrong and something's not right.
Yeah.
So I always tell the parents, don't shelter them. Don't shelter them from the truth. Really be honest and direct. That is the best way for them to fully understand and cope with whatever trauma or grief that they're going through. Yes, what's next? Again, don't allow your personal beliefs to get in the way. And what I mean by that is, one, going back to what I said about if a family member does pass away and your children is connected to their spirit, rather in the present form or in a dream, accept it. Don't shut it out or tell your kids, oh, you're crazy, or, or, yeah, I don't believe you.
Yeah.
Don't disregard it, accept it for what it is. And also, sometimes I do come across parents that have their own relationship with mental illness, or in terms of maybe their religious beliefs or cultural beliefs. And so when a child is experiencing unhealthy behavior, I may recommend something, and because of the parents' personal beliefs, again, religion or culture, they don't do what's best for their child. Me as a therapist, I'm not here to hurt your child, right? I'm here to help them and assist them. And you're part of that process. We're a team. So please, again, I always say to the parents, I honor and respect your culture and your religion, but try something different. What we're doing is healthy. We're not doing something bad. This is the best way. And so sometimes that process takes a little bit longer to kind of reel the parents in. But again, it's okay to reach out and look for help, even if it's something that you don't know or you're unsure of. And, always ask questions.
Yeah, and just if I can interject here as well, just as adults have different ways of coping and grieving, children do as well, and even siblings cope and grieve differently, within a family. And so I think it's important for parents to be aware and giving of that, and also to realize that children kind of grieve in bursts, right, or cycles. So it is really strange to see a kid who's so sorrowful over a loss, and then maybe 2 hours later they're like playing with their Lego, and that may be difficult for adults to understand because it's not a persistent feeling as such, but that is something that we do see in children.
Yeah, it's true.
Yeah. Let's move on to number 3, Amina.
Help your child remember. Yes, so I really enjoy this one because again, the grieving process can take time. And so instead of just letting your child completely forget what they lost, I really enjoy creating a piece of art. So with me, with my students that really love to dance, sometimes I will play their favorite song or a song where the lyrics remind them of what they lost. And then we create like a really cute dance routine to that song, right?
Lovely.
And some of my art therapist colleagues, they create like an actual piece of art. So they'll paint something, or they use arts and crafts to create something. And just even within a family, it can be a ritual. I know for in my family, my mom and I, what we do is we always celebrate the birthday of someone that we lost, and then it's an excuse to eat junk food. So we eat like the favorite cake of someone that we lost on their birthday. And so that's like our yearly family ritual. So again, it's just honoring, whomever the child lost, and it just puts a positive light, on the grieving process. It makes it a more fun, lighthearted experience.
It kind of brings them into life as well.
It's true.
As part of living. Giving them choices and being inclusive. So this kind of relates to what you were talking about with sharing memories and keepsakes. If there is a funeral, for example, if there is a memorial service of some kind, to kind of allow the child to be a part of that, or maybe to help organize parts of it depending upon their age. Telling your child what to expect. I think that's a great one, which we often, I think, miss.
Yes. Again, I think it just goes back to parents trying to protect their child, but you should let them know, right? So, for example, if the grief is a parent or family dynamic as a result of a divorce, you should let children know, two people love each other and they now are loving each other very differently. And these are the next steps. You're going to see your mom or your dad over the summer, or give us some time to figure out your schedule. So again, it just alleviates that anxiety, right? And back into children not being able to control the situation or control the future, what's going to happen. So giving them that structure and an organization of, okay, this is what happens when I experience this loss. This is the way that my mom, my dad, or my guardian is going to help me transition. What are the steps? So just giving it like a structure. It creates more, it's more tangible. It's something they can really understand and process. So that's really important. Not hiding, everything that's going on, but letting them know, okay, this is the first step. This is what's next. It really helps them process any anxiety or uncertainty that they're feeling.
Yeah, absolutely. It removes that fear of uncertainty, which causes that anxiety, right? And I guess that also kind of segues into sticking to regular routines and natural rhythms of life as much as possible, which leads us to point 7, which I love. Can you tell us a little bit about kind of your thoughts around that one?
Yeah, that's one of my favorites because welcome to life. There are good times, and I don't like to say bad times, that's just me. But there are challenging times. And this process, this trauma, this loss, this grieving process is a challenging natural process of life. And not only will you experience it now, you will experience it later and several times in your life. So just helping the child be in the present moment that, yes, this is what we're experiencing, but a year from now, we won't be experiencing this. But then guess what? 5 years from now, you may be experiencing something different, but your grieving process is going to come back. So I just like to give children that education that there are challenging times, and what you learn during this moment and the coping skills that you get, you can apply them in the future if something else traumatic or another loss happens in your life.
Absolutely. And I think that is the main point, right? If you learn healthy coping mechanisms as a child, you're really starting off on a very solid foundation for your adult life. And I just want to share this comment from Janara. I hope I pronounced your name correctly. And I appreciate your comment. She says that I love that idea. My father passed away last year and his favorite pie was strawberry. So we had a strawberry pie for his birthday.
I love it. Yum.
Yeah. And last but not least, of course, and this is something we've already touched on, is be open to seeking professional advice. So be aware of the red flags, be aware of the timeframes we're talking about. And if at all concerned, even if you're not at the 6 month, if you're concerned at any time, there are so many professionals like yourself who are out there to help and to get advice from. And just one little thing that I'll pop in here is that, children and adults actually who are having a really hard time with grieving and is kind of getting towards that area of mental health impairment, they may be diagnosed with an adjustment disorder, which then needs to be treated. So let's move on to the, let's call it the fun stuff, Amina. Starting off with this statement, my child is already in a dance class. It's enough therapy for them. I think we're mixing up a couple of things here, right? Dance class versus therapy.
Sure. And just to, again, touch base on all the creative art modalities. So a class is obviously your children teaching that specific style of dance. So for, it could be ballet or learning tap or salsa. If you see another creative arts therapist or thinking of it, but they already are in piano class or violin class. So the child is learning that specific art form. And the goal is a technique, right? How can my child advance and excel in this technique, in this art? So in a dance movement therapy class, the difference is the focus is not the technique. The focus is on the child and what are the best dance moves or movement interventions that is the best way for the child to express themselves. So I know for me, for example, I love improvisation. A lot of times I'll play music, usually a child's favorite song, and then I like to just see how they move. I don't care whether they're pointing their feet, how high their leg goes in a bot mall, right? It's really how they are expressing themselves. What do they want to say in their bodies? And my intervention is never correcting them and focusing on their technique. My interventions is, okay, that movement or that expression or that emotion is unhealthy. Let's do something different with the body so that we can heal that emotion. And so to get you in a much healthier place. Right.
So, whoops, I'm ahead of myself. I just want to stop sharing these slides for now so we can see you on the screen. I want to understand how this looks in practice. So I know you've been kind enough to put together a couple of your client cases that you could share with us. So can you just talk us through a couple of examples of what this could look like? And
yes, and if you guys give me about 2 seconds, I just want to adjust my camera. So hopefully you can see my body. I'll do my best.
Yeah.
Technology.
Thank you.
Okay, where are we? All right, so one of my clients, his name is Carlos, and he unfortunately lost his father during COVID-19. He is an 8th grader. He's 13 years old. And in his culture, he's the man of the family. So even though he's only 13, he is strong. He has it, he's holding it together. He's there for his mom and his younger siblings. So his movement is very bound and restrictive and percussive, right? So if I were to just give like a warm up, for example, I will go, inhale, arms up, exhale, side, inhale again, exhale, reach other sideways. Carlos and his body really wants to keep everything in control. And so his movement was very robotic and like stiff, okay? Yeah. And his legs it wasn't even a bend or relaxation in his knees. His legs just stayed really straight. So even if I were to say, okay, let's just tryst, Carlos, we're still warming up. His movement, again, very robotic and stiff. Okay? And so not being able to release, and if you were to even do that movement at home, what I just did, notice that he's not even breathing, right? It's like this restriction of, I'm like, please don't die on me, please breathe. And so an intervention that I like to do is really common in modern dance for anyone who's seen it or took a dance class, but it's a sense of suspense and release. So suspension and release, and it forces you to inhale with the breath and exhale, and then you have to just let go. You don't have a choice, right? In this rhythm of movement. And so suspension and release is when we inhale up, and I'm on releve, so my heels are up off the ground. So I inhale up, and I exhale. So I give myself a deep exhale. Again, my body is contracted. I'm bending my knees. So we go from this movement, and the intervention is inhale up, exhale when I hear your breath, let it out. Again, inhale up, exhale, let me hear your breath, right? And so this is bounce movement, almost like a rebound effect.
Yeah.
So that's like an example of what I would do or what I did with Carlos. And that's just, the beginning of our warm up. But again, just changing what he's used to and how he's expressing himself in his body into giving something that's much healthier for him.
And how did he respond?
It was hard.
Yeah.
It was challenging.
Top energy there.
To let go. It was hard for him to let go. And I'm like, Carlos, I can't hear you. Where's your breath? Right?
Yes.
So again, if you were to ever just do this with your body and hold your breath, it's really impossible. Right? You have to exhale. And so unfortunately it was challenging, but I gave him a push. Definitely had to give him a push. But yeah, anytime I work with a client and they're not used to moving their bodies, any intervention, it takes time. Yeah.
And how they generally, you see all of this in their body. What are they verbalizing to you?
So usually at the end of a session that I do like a warm up, a middle session, and then a cool down. I'll say, what came up for you? Because, obviously we still talk. I still do verbal therapy. And so actually with Carlos doing the movement, even though it took him time to really get the full dynamic, he was like, I feel free. And he really enjoyed the suspension. He enjoyed having his body lifted up and in releve. And he was like, I really enjoy free. It feels free to me. And then with him being male, well, again, not to be stereotypical with gender or anything, but he enjoys physical activity. Yeah. And so in PE class, they do burpees when you jump up and go down. And he says, it reminds me of burpees. Like burpees are one of my favorite things to do in PE class. He's like, I like the freedom of that. But then coming down and bending, he was like, no, I was like, I didn't like that. I didn't care for that. I was like, okay.
Yeah. But it's interesting because one of the first things we try to teach children with emotional regulation is breathing techniques, right? And controlling their breathing and the fight flight reflex. So all of that is incorporated into that kind of physical movement.
Yeah.
Which, we don't necessarily break down and think about when we're doing these movements. You have another client that you wanted to share with us who's a little younger than Carlos.
Yes. So Shannon is a 6th grader, and I'm just reading my notes here.
Yeah.
Yes. So their grief was actually a sense of safety and love from the family unit. So Shannon unfortunately went through a trauma. They had a lot of sexual harassment and verbal threats, and even a homicidal threat from a peer. And so when that finally came to light, that this peer pretty much threatened to kill them. I know we're like, what? Elementary school, 6th grade? Yeah. That changed the whole family dynamic of how the parents treated them. So Shannon's mother and father felt really guilty that they weren't there. And they went on this defensive mode of, we're good parents. Like, how would we know this even happened? And so instead of saying, oh, sorry, Shannon, that we weren't there for you, they took their anger and frustration of not being the perfect parent out on Shannon. So they stopped loving them and saying, almost like, it's your fault that the world thinks that we're bad parents and your teachers thinks that we're bad parents. It's your fault. So their grief was just this entire shift of getting this love and comfort from their parent. So their movement was very withdrawn and kind of strained. So in an improv, when I had Shannon do improv to like their favorite song, that it was this weird like strain thing. This like really closed, like this really closed in movement, and your shoulders are just very hunched over. And even though Shannon used to do ballet class, which they loved, a pirouette, which is a turn in passe, instead of doing, okay, pirouette, their turn was this.
Wow.
It was strained, hunched over in this like low, really light quality. And so my intervention for Shannon, also noticing that they stayed in this really small space, hemisphere, as I really helped him, first of all, open their chest, right? Really build that self-confidence within themselves. So we repeated their movement, but adding a more healthier way of their posture and movement of their body. So instead of this strain thing, I really extended my hands and my fingers, and I really did a deep inhale and then open up. And we had an image of a tree. So I said, grow your branches. So we really opened this up and slowed it down and had them extend their fingers. Okay. And then when they did their pirouette, I was like, you did ballet class before. This is not a pirouette. How do you do it? And because the 5th position naturally made the movement bigger and opening of the chest, the pirouette, we went back to that technique as well. And then we also would move around the room. So after we changed the movement, we just walked in a circle, really had them explore the space and movement of their body, right? And so it really helped, again, this, I don't want to exist. My mom and dad doesn't love me. I don't understand what's going on. To like love yourself, self-confidence, breathe, open this up, right? And again, just like Carlos, there was some resistance for sure. And it took time for them to really fully mimic or mirror the quality of the movement and what we were doing.
Right. So those two stories just, I guess, kind of brought home 2 points to me. One is that, obviously when you're helping your child deal with grief, you should really make sure that you're dealing with your own grief and your own issues even before that. And it alludes to what you talked about earlier, which is, the parents' relationship with mental health and around mental health. But even if there are no issues with mental health, you need to deal with your own issues, really. And then the second thing is with kids, I mean, body language is so vital. As you say, with this kind of hunched over postures, this kind of physical withdrawal, when you're looking for it, it's so obvious, but you need to know to look for it.
It's true.
Yeah. So I have a question. How do you know that your child might be a good fit for dance movement therapy? Is there any way that you would know, or do you just try it?
Every child has a way to express themselves. I would say if your child already enjoys movement, it'll be a good candidate. So if your child is already, not just in a dance class, but if your child enjoys sports, or your child enjoys, being out on the playground and on the jungle gym, like if you know your child is like just a movement person, then that's a good candidate. If your child is more introverted, maybe they're a gamer, if they're more reading books, it may take time for them to warm up. I mean, DMT is good for anyone, but to be honest, it's just going to take time for them to really enjoy expressing themselves in that way.
Yeah.
So I would say maybe if you do like creative arts therapy, I would say music therapy or even art therapy would be best for them. But yeah, dance therapy or even drama therapy where the body is expressed. If your child is already a mover, then they're a good candidate for that.
I mean, I guess talking about sort of some child perhaps who does not respond as well to physical therapy, physical movement in that way. I mean, writing therapy, creative arts, journaling, all of those kinds of things are out there as well, right? So I know we're starting to, it's been such an interesting conversation. I could continue forever, I think, but I know we're getting towards the end of our time. So I just want to bring you, Amina, to this statement. Grief has an end point.
Yes, another myth buster.
Yeah.
Again, in life, there's always going to be something that's a trigger to a memory of that time where that child has lost or that child had experienced trauma, and then grief was a result of that. So there is no endpoint. Even after doing therapy, and there's a termination period where therapy ends, there's always going to be a person that reminds them of that, or a sense of smell, or an event or a song that they hear, or an object that they see, where they're always going to go back to grief. And of course, time heals, one. And then two, having therapy, they have their coping skills so that when they are triggered to remember that loss or that sense of grief, they don't completely, shut down, right? They can still deal with it and handle it.
Absolutely. And acknowledge that it's a normal part of living.
Yes.
So let's move along. I mean, if we were to remember just 4 or 5 things, I guess 4 things from this evening's conversation, what would you really want to focus on?
Yeah, so I remember Zarme, you said it best. Everyone grieves differently, not just adults, but children. Just accept them for who they are. Like you said, if they're crying and the next second they're playing Legos, it is what it is. It's fine. Self-harm behavior or any harm to the skin, do not jump ahead to say, oh, it's a mental illness, it's a diagnosis, they're suicidal. It's just an unhealthy coping skill. But again, do reach out and look for professional help. DMT really helps because the saying goes, issues in your tissues. So not only is the stress in the mind and in your thoughts, but your stress is carried in your body, whether it's just in your posture or just how you express yourself in your body language. And of course, dance movement therapy is one body-based therapy to help in healing trauma.
Thank you, Amina. So Amina has kindly provided us with a whole host of resources here, where you can do some extra reading, you can get some extra pointers. Creative Movement Therapy Association of India, there are two different organizations. We have a bunch of different associations and organizations there, and also some articles and some books that you can read to kind of help you on that journey. So, Amina, before we sign off, I just wanted to let everybody else know here that, Amina is on our platform as one of our dance movement therapists. You can find her if you visit f2fhealth.com and just go to the care section of our website and book a consultation with her. Or even if you want just some advice and some more education, she's also there to help you out. So we do hope that this was helpful for all of you. I want to point out that next week we do have a pause in our programming, but the week after, this is a very hot topic, particularly with all the news in the last couple of days, vaccinating your family, fact versus fiction. And we'll be speaking with Professor Deb Cosco about regular childhood vaccinations, as well as, of course, COVID vaccinations, which are on top of most people's minds right now. Amina, I want to thank you again for sharing your knowledge and your expertise.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, Amina, you were amazing. Thank you so much. I'm a huge, huge believer being an integrative medicine physician and having a daughter who dance was the extraordinary to get her past many things. It's just, you release so many endorphins and you're in touch with the spiritual and mental and mind and body. And so you were just brilliant tonight. So thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you. It's my honor and pleasure. And I hope all those who are listening, you did get something out of it. So thank you all for your energy. I really appreciate it.
And thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, everyone. Have a great night. Good night, Ami. Good night, Amina.
Good night. Good night, everyone.
Take care, everyone.